Donald Trump continues to have a massive influence in the Republican primary process. When you look at his endorsements in 2020, I think he was 84-1. I think what you're going to see is in the 2022 cycle, former President Trump is still going to be involved. He has a war chest that will allow him to be involved. He has obviously name recognition, and he is someone who is very coveted when it comes to Republican primary endorsements. So he's still going to be involved. I think it's just too early to tell what his plans are for 2024.
Certainly, he dominates any potential talk of 2024. Is there room for intellectual diversity in the Republican Party right now? I know you're a Trump guy, but is it too much about him? Does the party need to be able to welcome in people who might disagree a little bit?
Well, look, we've been a big tent party, and what we've seen under Donald Trump is that, unlike what most people want to report, we've seen an increase in the African-American population coming and supporting President Trump in the last election. Unlike the years of Mitt Romney or John McCain, we've seen an increase in the Hispanic population coming and supporting the Republican Party ideal. So we're a party that is inclusive of everybody, because the reason is the America First agenda is agnostic to your skin color, to your socioeconomic status, to your religious beliefs. It's about putting Americans first, and that's what Donald Trump has talked about for the last 4 years.
The field is essentially frozen until he makes up his mind. I think the last time we had you on this program, it was a while back, you indicated if President Trump does decide to pass the torch, you believe that former Vice President Mike Pence is the next man up. Has your opinion changed on that front, given what happened in the last month?
Well, I think Mike Pence will look at running for president very seriously in 2024. But as you said, I think it all comes down to what former President Trump wants to do. Look, I think we're seeing candidates already coming through our home state, whether it's Senator Tom Cotton, who's been actively engaged in New Hampshire politics early and was last cycle, or additional candidates who are going to continue to come through here. I think all of them are going to have to wait and see what former President Trump does. I think you will see someone like a Charlie Baker or Larry Hogan, the governors of Massachusetts and Maryland, respectively, decide to get into the race, regardless of what former President Trump does. But at the end of the day, if President Trump decides to run for presidency again in 2024, he will be the person to beat in the primaries.
Do you think the vice president really did the wrong thing by choosing to adhere to the Constitution and just presiding over the certification of the electoral count vote there on January 6th and 7th?
No, I think the vice president did exactly what he was supposed to do. Look, there were no states in the country that sent multiple delegates to Washington, D.C. for consideration, which is very different than what has occurred in the past. As an example, if New Hampshire would have sent delegates to both the Republicans and the Democrat electors to Washington, D.C. for consideration, then Mike Pence would have had the opportunity to say, I don't know which of these electors we should choose. But no state did that. So Mike Pence's role as the president of the Senate on that day was strictly perfunctory. He was obligated, in my opinion, to accept the results of what the state sent forward.
Can you take us through what you did leading up to that fateful day in Washington? Because Democrats here in New Hampshire have accused you of being involved somehow in the planning of what happened on January 6th. Admittedly, the evidence is not strong. It's a Facebook post from a guy in Nebraska.
You know what I did, Adam? I went to the Trump Hotel the night before. I spent some time with some friends, which I have probably done hundreds, if not thousands of times over the last 5 years. I was at the hotel for about 30 minutes. Some of the people that were there were guys like Peter Navarro, who, as you know, is a White House staffer, and Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, and people I've been able to call friends over the last 6 years. And so if I am guilty of spending time with my friends on the day before the event that transpired, then yes, I am guilty of that. But I was nowhere at the event on the 6th. I didn't participate in any of the rallies. I had nothing to do with them. As a matter of fact, I was at the Republican National Convention winter meeting in Florida on that day, and there's probably 400 people who saw me there.
What was your reaction when you saw that video of people chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," and, having been in law enforcement yourself, these people beating police officers?
Adam, I will never tolerate violence against one another. I will never tolerate violence against our men and women in law enforcement. I didn't support it when the Black Lives Matter movement was doing it, running through our streets and destroying police cars and substations, and I sure as heck do not appreciate it or support it when it was on our nation's capital. And those are tough conversations at home, because my children asked me, Dad, what do you think about what happened at the Capitol? And I told them it was wrong what happened during the BLM movement. it was wrong what happened at the Capitol. And we are a family that supports law enforcement every single time. So anybody who wants to incite violence against other individuals or against law enforcement will never have the support of the Lewandowski family.
So many Republicans and so many Americans really jumped on board with President Trump because of the strength he projected, not just against Democrats, but for the country at large. Did he take that too far, though, in the time after the election?
Well, Adam, what he said, and what's very important is you have to listen to some of the words that he used. Let's go and protest peacefully and patriotically. If those words are inciting riots, then we need to rethink our opportunity for free speech. And more than that, I've spoken to the president on dozens of occasions since that event. He never wanted anyone to commit any violence. He never wanted to see anybody get hurt. He doesn't condone it in any way, shape, or form. But he is right about one thing. Most of our politicians in Washington are weak. They are go along to get along. They are do nothing individuals. And I think a big part of the reason why Donald Trump was sent to Washington, D.C. in 2016 was to change the culture in D.C., to put Americans first, and to fight for the ideals of America. And that shouldn't be a bad word. That shouldn't mean that we shouldn't have the opportunity to stand for the flag or kneel for God or protect the men and women and support the men and women of both law enforcement and our military. And we have seen the left chastise those ideals for the last 4 years. And I think that's what's dividing the country more than anything.
You're forming a new PAC to help pro-Trump Republicans get elected. Obviously, winning back the Senate is going to be a key priority in 2022. Does that job become harder now that Senator McConnell has come out so strongly against President Trump?
Well, look, President Trump still has an enormous influence in the Republican primary process. And I think what you're going to see in competitive primaries, particularly in states like Alabama and others, are that the Trump endorsement matters. And I respect Mitch McConnell for his 37 years in the U.S. Senate. But I think when it comes to endorsements of candidates, Donald Trump in the Republican primary is going to be that person. And look, Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, President Trump, and I all have the same objective. That's to ensure that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are no longer leading the parties in Washington, D.C., and that Republicans serve as a check and balance on the Biden administration after 2022.
What about you? You've said recently that you might be interested in looking at a run for governor here in New Hampshire if Governor Sununu decides to either move on to that Senate race or go to the private sector or not run for re-election. Explain your thinking there. This is one of the least powerful governorships in the entire country. You arguably have more of a say in the political process from your perch currently. So why would you want to be governor?
Well, Adam, I think being the governor is a direct opportunity to impact the people's lives in New Hampshire on a daily basis. Look, some of the policies of governors around this country have been so draconian that we've seen small businesses and big businesses alike be adversely affected because of the COVID virus response. When you look at what Ron DeSantis has done in Florida and Kristi Noem has done in South Dakota, and you juxtapose that with what Governor Cuomo has done in New York, you see that a governor's decisions have direct impacts on people's lives. And just this week, we saw Governor Sununu say that he's going to force or mandate that the kids go back to schools in grades K through 8. That makes me very happy because I've got 4 kids in that system. But my question is, when did the science change? We know that the schools have never been super spreader places. We know that our kids learn better in schools. And we know that when our children are not in school, some of them disappear into a broken system. And those schools and sometimes are the only places where those kids get a hot meal or have a welfare check from somebody who cares about them. So I think we need to put our kids back in schools. We need to let our small businesses open. We need to do so in a safe and structured environment. And the opportunity to be governor is an opportunity to impact people's lives in a positive sense on a daily basis. Your
reputation is one of a bit of a political street fighter, a hard-nosed advocate for your causes. But do you think you'd have to change stylistically at all approaching the corner office or not?
Well, of course. Look, you want to be able to work with everybody. You have to work with the executive council members, the members of the state house and the state senate. I've got a lot of friends who serve in all of those capacities. But the truth is, when you're the governor of a state, you're the governor of everybody. And if that means you won with 50.1% or 99%, you're there to work on behalf of every person in the state. And sure, am I a hard-nosed guy? Am I a guy who wants to go and fight for what they believe in? You bet I do. But I also understand that once you're in elective office, you have to work with everyone together. And I can tell you that for the best for the residents of the state of New Hampshire, if I ran for governor, and won, I would do that every single day.
Just one quick question as we wrap up here. Obviously, you mentioned President Trump's record in primaries is stellar. It's been difficult, though, in elections where Trump is not on the ballot for those Trump Republicans to win. How do you solve that problem moving forward?
Well, I think the Republican Party is going to be more motivated than ever going to the 2022 election. I think, the policies of Joe Biden and the Biden administration, where on the first day he's eliminated 11,000 jobs through the Keystone Pipeline. He's governed by fiat, meaning executive order, more so than any president in our nation's history. What you see is that the far left Democrat agenda is on full display right now. So I think the Republicans are going to be very motivated to turn out both in the primaries in 2022 and in the general elections. And historically speaking, when one party controls the House, the Senate, and the White House, that party traditionally loses one of those bodies in the next election. It was the case with Barack Obama. It was the case with Donald Trump. And I believe it to be the case with Joe Biden going forward.
All right, Corey Lewandowski, thank you so much for joining us on Close Up. We appreciate the time.
Thank you.